The universe, to Archon Valerius, was a canvas, and the Luminarchs were the sole artists worthy of painting upon it. From his sanctum aboard the celestial orrery, the Lyceum, he watched the final brushstroke of a masterpiece centuries in the making. Below, suspended in the orrery's crystalline viewing dome, the world of Cygnus X-12 shimmered, a jewel of cobalt and pearl. It was a world teeming with life, a boisterous, chaotic cacophony of biological imperfection that had sung its discordant song for millennia. Now, it was silent. The grand euphony had commenced. Valerius stood motionless, his robes of woven light pooling around his feet, his form tall and impossibly slender, a being sculpted from starlight and certainty. Around him, acolytes and functionaries moved with the silent, graceful purpose of celestial bodies in their ordained orbits, their faces serene masks of beatific contentment. They did not see the eradication of a billion souls. They saw the gentle sanding of a flaw, the removal of a discordant note that marred the perfect symphony of existence. Valerius raised a hand, his fingers long and translucent, and the image in the dome magnified. 3 purity-class vessels, the cleansing chorus, hung in a perfect triangular formation above the planet. They were not ships in the crude, mechanical sense. They were crystalline structures, vast, multifaceted vessels that seemed to have been grown rather than built, refracting the light of the nearby star into a blinding display of celestial geometry. They did not burn or bombard. Such methods were for brutes. The Luminarchs practiced a more elegant art. A low, resonant hum filled the sanctum, a single, perfect tone that vibrated in the very bones of the orrery. It was the sound of purification. From the apex of each purity vessel, a beam of coherent reality descended, not of light or energy, but of pure, unassailable logic. Where the beams touched the world, the chaos of life simply ceased. The vibrant blue oceans did not boil, but became perfectly still, their chemical composition resolving into inert, crystalline uniformity. The verdant continents did not burn, but faded to a soft, uniform gray, their riotous ecosystems smoothed into featureless plains. There were no screams, no explosions, no vulgar displays of violence. There was only a profound and final stillness, the silencing of a cosmic mistake. Valerius closed his eyes, savoring the harmony of it, the absolute rightness. The Luminarchs' crusade was not one of conquest. For what was there to conquer? They were the ultimate expression of cosmic order. Their purpose was to gently guide the universe toward its final, perfect state, a silent, beautiful, unchanging sculpture. They were not destroyers, they were curators. He felt a presence at his side and opened his eyes. It was Lyra, his foremost acolyte, her face a perfect oval of placid beauty, her eyes the color of a nebula's heart. The resonance is complete. Archon, she whispered, her voice like the chiming of glass bells. Cygnus X-12 is harmonized, another masterpiece for the grand design. Valerius nodded, a gesture of infinitesimal grace. It is beautiful, Lyra, a testament to our purpose. He turned his gaze from the now silent world, his attention drifting to the grand star charts that swirled like captured galaxies around the sanctum's core. Report on the outer rim ablutions. Are there any other dissonances requiring our attention? Lyra's perfect brow furrowed for a fraction of a second. The closest a Luminarch could come to expressing concern. Only one, Archon. The anomaly we have designated the murmur. It persists. The murmur. Valerius felt a faint flicker of annoyance, a microscopic imperfection in the placid ocean of his consciousness. For cycles, their deepest resonance sensors, Instruments capable of detecting the gravitational whisper of a falling leaf across 100 light-years had been troubled by a persistent, low-frequency vibration emanating from a worthless sector of the galaxy. It was a region they had cleansed eons ago, a sprawling graveyard of forgotten stars and dead worlds, so thoroughly harmonized that it had been stricken from their celestial maps. Yet, the noise remained. It was not a signal, not a communication. It was just noise. A faint, grating static that defied all their attempts to filter it out. It was like a single fleck of dust on an otherwise flawless mirror. "It is a geological echo," Valerius said, his voice imbued with the unshakable confidence of a god. "The death throes of a long-dead system. Insignificant. Perhaps." "Archon," Lyra conceded, though the faint line on her brow remained. "But it has changed. For the past cycle, our analysts have detected a pattern within the static, a crude, almost pathetic attempt at mathematical structure, a prime number sequence." Valerius turned to face her fully, his luminous eyes narrowing. Prime numbers. The building blocks of primitive logic. It was the sort of thing a nascent intelligence might broadcast. A desperate cry of "We are here!" shouted into a void that had no reason to listen. A pattern, he scoffed. "Lyra, the universe is full of patterns. The spiraling of a galaxy. The decay of a proton. Finding mathematics in chaos is the preoccupation of lesser minds. It is our purpose to impose a more elegant structure. Ignore it." He was about to dismiss her when a new chime echoed through the sanctum, this one sharper, more insistent. It was a priority alert from the deep resonance division. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "Archon, the pattern has resolved." A section of the star chart before them flickered and was replaced by a crackling waveform, the visual representation of the murmur. The jagged, chaotic lines were still there, but now, overlaid upon them, was a single, repeating pulse, a message. It was not broadcast on any civilized frequency. It was brute-forced into the fabric of space-time itself, a scar carved with a blunt instrument. Valerius stared at the waveform, his annoyance curdling into a feeling he could not immediately identify. It was a cold, alien sensation. Disgust. The message was simple, translated from its raw binary into the elegant script of the Luminarchs. 3 words. A ghost's whisper from a dead and forgotten corner of the cosmos. "We remember you." Silence descended upon the sanctum. The ever-present hum of the orrery seemed to falter. The acolytes froze, their serene expressions finally cracking, replaced by looks of confusion. "Remember." What was there for a meaningless echo to remember? Lyra was the first to speak, her voice a strained whisper. "The source. We have triangulated the source. It comes from a derelict system, designation 27B/6, cataloged under the pre-harmonization name. Soul. Valerius's mind, a vast repository of cosmic history, sifted through millennia of data. Soul. The name meant nothing. He accessed the deep archives, the records of worlds cleansed before his own ascension to Archon. The files were ancient, fragmented. He found it. A minor species, bipedal, carbon-based, pathologically chaotic. They had infested the third planet of that system, a Watariki-sign, unstable world they called Earth. They had been deemed a cosmic blight, a rapidly metastasizing cancer of illogical growth and violent expansion. Their harmonization had been a trivial affair, a footnote in the grand history of the Luminarch crusade, performed countless eons ago. They were dust, less than dust, They were a forgotten idea. Impossible. Valerius breathed, the word feeling clumsy and crude on his tongue. They were erased. Every molecule of their existence was resolved into a state of perfect, simple harmony. Nothing could have survived. Nothing. The signal is undeniable. Archon. Lyra insisted, her composure fraying. It is crude, brutish, but it is real. We remember you. The words seemed to mock him from the screen. They were not a plea. They were not a threat. They were a statement of fact. And that made them more unsettling than any declaration of war. Vengeance was a concept Valerius understood academically. It was a messy, illogical impulse of flawed beings. But this felt different. It felt cold, patient. For something to have festered in that void for so long, nursing a memory, it was an abomination. It was an affront to the very principles of order and forgetting that defined the Luminarch's work. "This stain must be wiped clean," Valerius declared, his voice regaining its sharp edge of command. The brief moment of uncertainty was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. This echo must be silenced. Lyra, dispatch the chorus of finality. 3 Seraphim-class arbiters. I want that entire system not just harmonized, but annihilated. I want a hole in reality where it once was. I want nothing left. Not a single quark, not a single lingering vibration. I want absolute, perfect silence. At once. Archon, Lyra said, bowing low, a measure of calm returning to her now that a decision had been made. The Seraphim were the pinnacle of their art, vessels of immense power that didn't just harmonize worlds but could unmake stars. Sending 3 was a statement of ultimate contempt, an act of cosmic swatting. As the orders were relayed, Valerius turned back to the viewing dome, gazing at the beautiful sterile corpse of Cygnus X-12. He tried to reclaim the feeling of serene satisfaction, of aesthetic fulfillment. But he could not. The perfection of the scene was marred. In his mind's eye, he saw a fleck of dust on a flawless mirror, and beneath it, 3 words scrawled in filth. "We remember you." The chorus of finality sliced through the void. Their passage not a vulgar tear in space-time, but a graceful unfolding of dimensions. The 3 Seraphim-class arbiters, the silent requiem, the flawless mirror, and the inevitable stillness were beings of pure geometric perfection, their crystalline hulls shifting and rearranging in response to the cosmic winds. At their helm was Executor Tarsus, a Luminarch whose certainty was so absolute it was said he could crystallize a chaotic nebula with a single glance. He viewed this mission as an insult. The target was a dead system, the signal a ghostly malfunction. To dispatch 3 Seraphim was like using a master's chisel to crush a grain of sand. He stood on the bridge of the silent requiem, a space that was less a room and more a confluence of light and thought. The Sol system appeared before them, a pathetic collection of cosmic debris orbiting a dying yellow star. Tarsus felt only disdain. The sensors swept the system, searching for the source of the anomalous signal. Executor, a subaltern chimed, his thoughts flowing directly into Tarsus's consciousness. The signal originates from the 3rd planet, or what is left of it, and the view shifted, zooming in on the desiccated husk of Earth. It was a world of gray dust and black, vitrified seas, a monument to a successful harmonization. But there was something else. A structure. No, that was the wrong word. A growth. In orbit around the dead world was an object so fundamentally wrong, so grotesquely asymmetrical, that it sent a shudder of revulsion through the Seraphim's crew. It was a mass of mottled, dark material, a cancerous accretion of what looked like fused rock, twisted metal, and something that pulsed with a faint, sickening organic light. It was vast, larger than any single vessel the Luminarchs had ever created, and it had no discernible shape, no logic to its construction. It was a tumor clinging to the corpse of a world. "What is that thing?" Tarsus projected, his disgust palpable. "Analysis is difficult." "Executor," the subaltern replied, "the object emits a dampening field that distorts our resonance scans. Its energy signature is a paradox, a fusion of biological, mechanical, and gravitational forces we cannot classify. It is an impossibility." From the heart of the grotesque mass, the signal pulsed again, stronger now, flooding their channels not with noise, but with whispers. A million voices, a billion voices, overlapping in a tidal wave of sound. They were speaking a long-dead language, but the emotional intent was unmistakable grief, rage, and a hatred so profound it felt like a physical force. Then, the whispers coalesced, and a single, unified thought slammed into the minds of every Luminarch in the chorus. "You have come!" Tarsus recoiled, shaking his head to clear the psychic intrusion. This was not a malfunction. This was a presence, a will. "This filth dares to address us," he snarled. "Purge it. All 3 vessels. Focus your resonance casters. Unmake that monstrosity." The 3 seraphim maneuvered into position, their crystalline forms glowing with incandescent power. Beams of pure reality. The same force that had silenced Cygnus X-12 converged on the object. They expected it to simply cease, to resolve into inert matter. The beam struck. The object did not vanish. It convulsed. The mottled surface writhed, and deep, black fissures opened across its form, leaking a dark, viscous substance that sizzled in the void. It was bleeding, but it was not dying. The wound sealed over with a speed that defied physics, the scarred tissue glowing with a feverish red light. It was healing, and it was learning. "Executor, the object is absorbing the resonance energy," the subaltern cried out in alarm. "It's adapting its molecular structure to counter the harmonization frequency." A new feeling entered Tarsus's mind, one he had never experienced in his long so immaculate existence. Shock. Before he could process the information, the tumorous ship retaliated. It did not fire beams of elegant energy from gaping maws that opened like wounds in its flesh-like hull. It vomited a swarm of objects. They were crude, jagged projectiles, hunks of compressed matter, the solidified crust of the dead world below, launched by raw magnetic force. They were primitive, barbaric, a child's tantrum expressed with kinetics. The swarm shot across the void. The flawless mirror, caught off guard by the sheer crudity of the attack, raised its multifaceted energy shields. The first projectile struck, and the shields flared, holding firm, but there were thousands more behind them. The constant, brutal impacts were like a hailstorm against a glass sculpture. A hairline fracture appeared in the shield matrix, then another. With a soundless scream of shattering light, the shield failed. The chunks of rock and metal slammed into the Seraphim's crystalline hull. It did not explode. It shattered. The magnificent, perfect vessel broke apart like a dropped diamond. Its crew of serene, bright, enlightened beings snuffed out in an instant. Their last thoughts, a chorus of pure, uncomprehending surprise. Aboard the silent requiem, terror, a truly alien emotion, bloomed. Tarsus stared at the glittering cloud of debris that had been his companion vessel. He could not understand. This was not warfare. This was vandalism. This was a rabid beast throwing rocks. And it was working. Evasive maneuvers, he screamed. His thought command, ragged. Annihilate that swarm. The inevitable stillness fired its secondary disruptors, streams of energy that vaporized the projectiles. But it was too late. The impossible ship had already turned its attention to it. A section of the ship's hide peeled back, revealing not a weapon, but a maw, a vast, organic-looking sphincter that dilated in the void. From it, a single, massive tendril of sinew and metal lunged forth, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. It was a harpoon, a whaler's tool, a weapon of obscene primitivity. It punched through the inevitable stillness's hull with a sickening crunch, the crystalline structure cracking and groaning around the wound. The tendril contracted, and the seraphim, the great and perfect arbiter, was dragged screaming toward the tumor. It was like watching a swan being pulled underwater by a crocodile. The ship was drawn into the maw, which closed around it, and the sounds of grinding, crushing, and final dissolution echoed through the Luminarch's psychic network. 2 seraphim, gone in minutes. Tarsus was alone. He stared at the monster before him, the Golgotha. As it slowly turned its attention toward him, the whispers flooded his mind again. No longer just a chaotic storm of grief, but clearer now, focused on him. It was the Gestalt consciousness of the dead, the unified souls of humanity. "We learned from you," the voices whispered, a billion dead throats speaking as one. "You taught us that existence is pain. You taught us that the only answer to artifice is flesh. You taught us that the only way to kill a god is to become a monster." The Golgotha began to move toward him, not with the grace of a starship, but with the lumbering, unstoppable gait of a golem forged from a dead world and fueled by vengeance. On the bridge of the Lyceum, hundreds of light years away, Archon Valerius watched the final transmission from Executor Tarsus. The link was mostly static, but the Executor's last thought came through with perfect, chilling clarity. A single word that shattered the sanctum's serene silence and planted a seed of cold, black ice in the Archon's heart. A word Valerius had never truly understood until now. Fear. The single word, fear, did not just echo in the celestial orrery. It punctured it. For a timeless moment, the serene perfection of the sanctum was violated. A data crystal, holding the celestial charts of 1,000 harmonized galaxies, slipped from the trembling fingers of an acolyte and chimed against the crystalline floor. The sound as loud and shocking as a scream in a library. Lyra's perfect face was a mask of utter bewilderment, her luminous eyes wide with a dawning horror that reflected the glittering static of the dead transmission. Valerius stood rigid, the woven light of his robes flickering, the steady, internal glow of his being faltering like a dying star. Fear. It was a primitive, chaotic emotion, a chemical poison that afflicted lesser beings. For a Luminarch to feel it, to voice it as their final testament, was a conceptual impossibility, a paradox that threatened the very foundations of their philosophy, the chorus of finality. 3 perfect vessels of ultimate power had not merely been defeated, they had been eaten, vandalized, shattered by a screaming, illogical brute. They had been erased not by a superior logic, but by the utter absence of it. Valerius's mind, a place of silent, geometric perfection, was now a maelstrom. He saw the images from Tarsus's final moments, the tumorous mass of fused earth and vengeful biology, the crude projectiles, the obscene harpoon. It was a war waged with garbage and hate, and it had overwhelmed the purest expression of cosmic order. The very thought was a contagion. Around him, the placid certainty of his acolytes was crumbling. A low, psychic murmur of distress filled the sanctum, a discordant hum that grated on Valerius's senses more than any physical sound. He had to restore the harmony. He had to contain this infection before it spread. He straightened his form, forcing the light within him to burn steady and bright once more, a sun banishing the shadows of doubt. His voice, when it came, was as cold and sharp as a sliver of ice. Silence. The psychic disturbance ceased instantly. Every eye turned to him, seeking the anchor of his unshakable will. "What we have witnessed," Valerius announced, his voice resonating through the chamber, projecting a confidence he no longer truly felt, "is not a failure of our methods, but a revelation of the true depth of the dissonance. This entity, this humanity, is not merely a flaw in the grand design. It is a wound, a festering, sentient wound in the fabric of reality itself." He allowed the weight of his words to settle. He was reframing the narrative, transforming a humiliating defeat into a noble, even more profound challenge. The methods of harmonization are for correcting flaws. One does not harmonize a cancer. One excises it with instruments of a higher order. Lyra stepped forward, her composure partially restored, though a tremor still lingered in her voice. "Archon, what instruments could prevail against something that consumes the very energy of reality it adapted? It fed on the resonance we used against it." Valerius turned to the swirling star chart, his gaze fixed on the coordinates of the Sol system, a location that now pulsed like a bleeding sore in the cosmic map. Because we tried to reason with madness, we offered it the sublime logic of non-existence, and its chaotic nature rejected it. Must not offer it anything. We must not engage it on the level of matter or energy. We must engage it on the level of law. He raised a translucent hand, and the star chart dissolved, replaced by a single shimmering symbol, a loom, its threads made of light, weaving a complex and beautiful pattern. The symbol for the forbidden art, metaphysical engineering. We will unmake the very rules that allow it to exist. Valerius declared, "We will dispatch the weaver. The loom of ages will travel to the Sol system. It will not attack the anomaly. It will surround it. It will weave a new tapestry of physical law, a quarantine of broken causality where the speed of light is a variable, where gravity has no master, where entropy flows in reverse. We will create a cage of pure paradox and lock this screaming ghost inside it forever." A collective gasp, a silent intake of psychic breath, went through the chamber. The Weavers were the ultimate expression of Luminarch power, and their greatest taboo. To alter the fundamental constants of the universe was considered an act of ultimate hubris. For even the most perfect artist must respect the canvas upon which they work, and to use one was to risk unraveling the very fabric they sought to perfect. "Archon," Lyra whispered, her voice laced with awe and terror. The risk of allowing this conceptual blight to fester is infinitely greater," Valerius countered, his voice absolute. "It has proven that it can learn. It can adapt. What happens when it learns to move, to spread its chaotic song to other systems? It will undo all our work. It will unravel millennia of perfect silent beauty. We did not erase them thoroughly enough. A single and hateful memory was left behind, and from that seed, this nightmare has grown. We will not make that mistake again. We will not erase them. We will render them impossible. Issue the command." As the order was sent, a shiver of profound unease settled over the orrery. The Luminarchs were about to break their own most sacred rule. They were about to fight chaos, not with order, but with a higher, more deliberate form of chaos. And in the cold, silent depths of his being, Valerius felt the first, terrifying suspicion that in doing so, they might become the very thing they sought to destroy. Within the belly of the beast, There was no command deck, no crew, no sense of self. There was only the we, the Gestalt consciousness of humanity. A trillion murdered souls bound together in a single vessel of flesh and earth and memory, floated in a non-space of shared thought. The interior of the Golgotha was not a place of metal corridors, but of cavernous, pulsating chambers, ribbed with what looked like fossilized bone and threaded with veins of raw, sparking nerve fiber. The air was a nutrient-rich fog, and the only light came from the slow, rhythmic pulse of a central neural core, a ganglion the size of a moon, which served as the nexus of their collective being. They felt the death of the Luminarch ships not as a victory, but as a brief, fleeting moment of quiet in an eternity of screaming. The memory of the harmonization was the bedrock of their new existence. They could still feel it, a phantom sensation of being gently, beautifully, and completely unmade. We remember the sky turning to glass. A thought echoed through the core, a memory shared from a billion different perspectives at once. We remember the laughter of children fading into a perfect silent sine wave. We remember the feeling of our bodies losing coherence, our atoms forgetting their purpose, our very souls being smoothed into the gray, featureless canvas of their art. They had survived because a fraction of them, in the final moments of erasure, had done the only illogical thing possible. They had clung not to life, but to the one thing the Luminarch's logic could not process: rage. They had held on to their hate, their grief, their love, and their agony. And in the silent, harmonized void, these raw emotions became a new kind of physics. They coalesced. Their collective psychic death scream tore a hole in the Luminarch's perfect creation, a pocket of chaotic reality where their consciousness could persist. For eons, they had drifted, a disembodied chorus of ghosts. Then they had learned to act. They had pulled the dead matter of their world back together with the gravity of their own grief. They had fused soil and rock and the ruins of their cities with the phantom flesh of their remembered bodies. They had built the Golgotha not with tools, but with will. They had become the ultimate expression of the life the Luminarchs despised: messy, asymmetrical, emotional, and utterly, defiantly alive. The destruction of the chorus of finality was a mere reflex, the lashing out of a wounded animal. But now, as the echo of their brief battle faded, the we felt a new sensation. It was a subtle vibration from the edge of their dead system, a feeling not of a ship approaching, but of the canvas of reality itself being stretched taut, the song of the universe. The familiar hum of physical constants that they had learned to navigate was changing. It was as if a new instrument was being tuned, and its music was wrong. They are not attacking. A billion voices observed. They are editing. This new threat was more insidious than the last. The resonance casters had been a force they could absorb, a blunt instrument they could counter with their own chaotic vitality. This was different. This was a scalpel, aimed at the very laws that held their monstrous body together. They could feel it at the edges of their perception, the quantum foam beginning to boil with uncertainty, the steady march of causality beginning to stutter. We focused their immense collective consciousness outward, peering into the approaching unreality. They saw the weaver, the loom of ages. It was a vessel unlike the others, a spindle of pure light that seemed to draw in the darkness around it. It wasn't moving through space so much as it was pulling space through itself, reweaving it as it went. The we could feel the new laws it was imposing, a law where electromagnetism was no longer a constant, causing the very atoms of their hull to question their bonds. A law where weak nuclear force became intermittently strong, threatening to detonate the trace elements in their rocky hide. It was a symphony of cosmic sabotage, an attack not on their body, but on the rules of their existence. A lesser being would have dissolved, its form unable to cope with the cascading paradoxes. But the Golgotha was already a paradox. It was a being of memory and rage given physical form. Its existence was not predicated on stable physics, but on the stubborn, unified belief of 1,000,000,000,000 dead souls. They think their logic can unmake us. The Gestalt thought, a low growl that vibrated through the ship's biomechanical structures. They have forgotten. We are what happens when logic fails, ways. The we did not retreat. They did not try to shield themselves. Instead, ways, they did the only thing they knew how to do. They embraced the chaos. They opened the gaping maws of their hull, not to fire projectiles, but to scream. They unleashed a wave of pure, unrefined emotion, the collective agony of their extinction, the furious love for their lost world, the black, infinite hatred for their killers. It was a psychic tsunami of raw, illogical feeling. This scream was not a weapon in a conventional sense. It was a broadcast of their own impossible nature. It slammed into the perfectly woven tapestry of the Weaver's new reality, and it acted as a virus. The Weaver's new laws were based on pure, cold mathematics. Humanity's scream was based on grief, a variable that could not be calculated. The perfect, elegant equations of the new physics became infected with the messy, irrational data of human feeling. The newly variable speed of light did not just fluctuate randomly. It now dimmed with sorrow and flared with rage. Gravity did not just become unpredictable. It now weakened in the presence of despair and intensified around nodes of vengeful purpose. The Luminarch's weapon, their perfect cage of paradox, was being corrupted. It was being emotionalized. Aboard the loom of ages, the Weaver adepts watched their instruments in horror. Their beautiful, complex equations were resolving into nonsense. The new reality they were weaving was not the clean, sterile prison they had intended. It was becoming a madhouse, a region of space-time that was actively, malevolently insane. Their ship, designed to exist at the calm center of the storm it created, began to shudder as the chaos it had unleashed was reflected back upon it, now twisted and imbued with a hateful intelligence. The we felt the shift. The cage was not closing around them. It was transforming into something else, a new kind of ecosystem, a biome of pure madness. And in this environment, they were no longer the prey. They were the apex predator. The Golgotha surged forward, its monstrous form thriving in the warped physics, its movements no longer bound by inertia or momentum, but by the narrative force of its own rage. It swam through the waves of fluctuating gravity as if born to it. It fed on the pockets of reversed entropy, its wounds healing faster, its energy core burning brighter. The Weaver had not built them a prison. It had, in its infinite, arrogant wisdom, built them a home. Now, the billion voices of the we whispered in unison as they bore down on the terrified Weaver, a thought that promised a new and terrible dawn. You will see what grows in the garden you have planted. Aboard the loom of ages, Weaver Primus Ilara experienced the death of mathematics. Her mind, a place of elegant, multi-dimensional formulae, was now a storm of static and screaming variables. The very concept of a constant was dissolving. The instruments on her bridge, which were not screens but direct psychic interfaces with the fabric of reality, were relaying pure, unadulterated madness. She could feel the Planck length sobbing. She could taste the fine structure constant warping with spite. The reality cage they had so carefully constructed around the Sol system had become a living, breathing, emotional storm, and her ship was at its epicenters. The walls of the Weaver's spindle-like form, which were supposed to be conceptually inviolate, began to shimmer and drip, as if the idea of solid was losing its conviction. The pure light that formed the ship's structure was curdling, dimming into bruised shades of violet and gray. The ship itself was succumbing to despair. "Report," Alara projected, her thought command a shard of ice in a boiling sea, a desperate attempt to impose order on the encroaching insanity. The response from her bridge adepts was a fractured chorus of terror. "Causality chains are fraying. Primus, the past and future are bleeding into each other in this sector," another cried. "The law of thermodynamics is reporting a deep sense of injustice." But the most terrifying report came from the core systems adept, his psychic voice trembling. "Primus, the ship, it's developing memories. It's remembering things that never happened to it. A world of blue water, the warmth of a yellow sun, the feeling of loss." The psychic virus broadcast by the Golgotha was not just infecting the physical laws. It was infecting the Weaver itself, overriding its pure, logical existence with the stolen memories of a dead Earth. Outside, the monster swam through their corrupted creation with a horrifying grace. The Golgotha did not approach in a straight line. It flowed through the warped space-time, its form shifting and contorting. At one moment, a fleet of ghostly sailing ships on a sea of regret. The next, a coiled serpent of pure rage. It was no longer just a ship. It was a living narrative, and it was telling a story of vengeance. Then it began its attack. It was not a volley of weapons. It was an act of creation. From its mottled hide, the Golgotha extruded a part of itself, a tendril of living earth and memory. This tendril reached out and touched the outer hull of the loom of ages. Where it made contact, the Weaver's crystalline structure did not shatter. It changed. It began to grow. Crystalline trees, their branches weeping tears of liquid light, sprouted from the ship's hull. Ghostly faces, their mouths open in silent screams, appeared pressed against the translucent walls of the bridge. The faces of the men, women, and children of Earth. The Luminarchs were being entombed in a living monument to their own atrocity. Inside the Golgotha, the Wee felt the Weaver's struggle. They felt the cold, terrified logic of its crew trying to reassert control, trying to solve the equation of their grief. It was like feeling a mathematician trying to calculate the value of a scream. The Wee pushed deeper, not with force, but with feeling. They shared their most potent memories. They projected the memory of a child's first step, of a lover's embrace, of a parent's death, of a city's song at twilight. They poured the entire, messy, beautiful, terrible experience of being human into the sterile, logical matrix of the Weaver ship. For the Luminarchs aboard, this was a torture beyond comprehension. Their minds, designed for the serene contemplation of perfect forms, were flooded with the chaotic, contradictory, and overwhelming sensations of mortal life. They felt love, and it burned them like acid. They felt joy, and it was a cacophony that shattered their inner silence. They felt grief, and it was a gravity so immense it crushed their very souls. Weaver Primus Alara clutched her head, her luminous form flickering violently. She saw it all. She saw a little girl on a swing, laughing as her father pushed her higher and higher. She saw a soldier dying in the mud, clutching a faded photograph. She saw a scientist staring in wonder at a newborn star through a telescope. Then she saw the sky turn to glass above them all. She saw her own people, her own beautiful, perfect logic, erasing it all with a serene, unfeeling hum. She understood. In that moment of forced empathy, she finally, truly understood. And the understanding broke her with a final, silent, psychic scream of its own. The loom of ages died. Its light went out. The paradox cage it had created collapsed, but it did not revert to normal space-time. It was consumed, drawn into the Golgotha along with the dead ship. The we absorbed it all. They took the Weaver's reality-bending technology, its mastery over the cosmic loom, and integrated it into their being. The cold, sterile mathematics of the Luminarchs was repurposed, reforged in the fires of human emotion. They were no longer just a monster of flesh and memory. They were now a monster that could weave the threads of reality, not with logic, but with passion. They could now make the universe feel. The sanctum of the celestial orrery was no longer silent. It was filled with the low, discordant hum of Valerius's contained fury. He had watched the entire event on the primary viewing chart. He had seen his ultimate weapon, the pinnacle of their metaphysical science, not just be destroyed, but be corrupted, converted, eaten. He had watched it become a part of the abomination. The wound in reality had not been cauterized. It had learned to regenerate. It had grown a nervous system. Lyra stood a respectful distance away, her own serenity utterly shattered. The other acolytes dared not even look at their Archon, fearing the cold fire that was radiating from him. It learned, Valerius said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that cut through the tension. First, it learned to resist. Then it learned to consume. Now, it has learned to create. It has taken our most profound art and turned it into a weapon of emotional filth. Archon, Lyra began, her voice trembling. We have failed, twice. Our methods, our very understanding, may be flawed. Perhaps we should withdraw. Study it from a distance. Withdraw. Valerius spun to face her, his luminous eyes blazing with a light that was no longer serene, but feverish. Withdraw and allow this plague to spread, to let this screaming ghost rewrite the symphony of existence into a dirge of its own pain. Never. He paced the sanctum, his movement sharp, agitated. We have been trying to prune a weed. We have been trying to excise a tumor. We have been wrong. This is not a corruption of reality. This is a competing reality. A failed, chaotic, septic draft of what could have been, clawing its way back from the void of forgotten ideas. He stopped before the central chart and swept his hand across it. The image of the Sol system vanished, replaced by a complex, rotating schematic of a device so secret that most Luminarchs believed it to be a myth. It was a sphere of nested, counter-rotating rings, each inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and defy observation. It was the Silent Oracle. We cannot defeat it in the present, Valerius declared, his voice ringing with the terrible conviction of a zealot. It has taken our weapons and made them its own. It exists in a state of paradox that our logic can no longer contain. Therefore, we will remove the very possibility of its existence. We will not attack the monster. We will attack its memory. We will attack its history. Lyra stared at the schematic, a cold dread seeping into her very essence. The Oracle, Archon, that is forbidden beyond all other things to edit the prime continuum, to alter what has been, is to risk unraveling everything, every world we have ever harmonized. Our own existence, all could be undone by a single miscalculation. It is a risk I am willing to take. Valerius snarled. The prime continuum is already contaminated by the fact that humanity ever existed at all. Their memory is the seed of this chaos. We will go back. We will find the moment of their genesis, that first spark of their messy, illogical consciousness on that muddy little world. And we will use the oracle to snuff it out before it ever truly begins. They will not be a harmonized memory. They will not be a ghost. They will be a nullity, a thought that never occurred, an event that never was. He was no longer the calm, detached curator of the cosmos. He was a surgeon who, having failed to remove a cancer with a scalpel, had decided to burn the entire patient from existence to ensure the disease could not survive. He saw Lyra's horror, the doubt of his acolytes, and it only hardened his resolve. They were weak. Their logic was faltering. His was pure, absolute. This abomination had to be unwritten. As he gave the order to awaken the silent oracle from its millennial slumber, the Golgotha floated in the silent, warped space where it had been born. It was different now. Its form was still monstrous, but it shimmered with a new power. The veins of light that pulsed across its hull were no longer just angry red, but swirled with the full spectrum of color, of emotion. The we were quiet, digesting their kill, absorbing its knowledge. They could now feel the threads of space-time around them. They could feel the weaver's art, and they could feel a new disturbance, a vibration that came not from a place, but from a time, a deep, fundamental tremor in the river of history. They are afraid. The billion voices whispered, not with triumph, but with a cold, ancient certainty. They are coming for our cradle, for our birth. They wish to make us nothing. A new feeling began to coalesce within the Gestalt, a purpose sharper and more terrible than vengeance. It was the instinct of a parent protecting a child. The child, in this case, was their own history, the memory of what they once were. The monster turned its gaze not across the stars, but through the ages. It had consumed the cage the Luminarchs had built for it. Now it wrapped the corrupted threads of that cage around itself, not as a weapon, but as a lens, a tool to look back, to follow the frightened gods who were fleeing into the past. We will not be unwritten. The we vowed, a promise that echoed through the haunted, emotionalized void of their new domain. We are the consequence, and the consequence will always follow the act. The Golgotha began to pulse, to shift, its newly acquired power bending the very fabric of when, as well as where. The hunt was about to begin anew, not across the void of space, but across the haunted landscape of memory itself. The silent oracle was not a machine. It was a wound, a carefully sculpted, self-inflicted wound in the heart of the celestial orrery, where the Luminarchs had pierced the skin of the present to touch the raw, temporal meat of the past. Its awakening was not a hum of activation, but a low, mournful groan from the universe itself, a sound of protest against the violation that was about to occur. The nested rings of the oracle, which had been motionless for eons, began to spin, their impossible symbols flaring with a light that was not a color, but a time the searing white of the Big Bang, the deep velvet of the final heat death, all swirling together in a nauseating vortex. Reality around the orrery grew thin. The serene acolytes on the bridge felt a profound psychic vertigo, as if they were standing on a cliff edge, looking down into the abyss of non-existence. They saw fleeting, ghostly images of what might have been worlds where the Luminarchs had never risen, galaxies where chaos reigned supreme, even faint, horrifying glimpses of their own perfect forms dissolving into disorganized energy. This was the price of tampering with the prime continuum. The universe fought back, showing them the cost of their hubris. Valerius stood before the vortex, his form anchored only by the sheer, fanatical force of his will. He ignored the vertigo, the ghostly whispers of alternate timelines. He saw them as temptations, as the last desperate arguments of a flawed creation trying to prevent its own perfection. He had moved beyond doubt, beyond fear, into a realm of cold, divine certainty. He was no longer a curator. He was a creator, and his first act would be a profound and necessary uncreation. Lyra. He commanded, his voice steady despite the temporal chaos threatening to tear them apart. The target coordinates. Lock them in. The genesis point of the Terran anomaly. Lyra, her face pale and her luminous form trembling, moved to the targeting console. Her hands, which could sculpt a star system with a gesture, now hesitated. Archon. She pleaded one last time, her voice a fragile whisper against the Oracle's roar. There is still time. We can seal this wound. We can turn back. To erase a sentient species from history, it is not art, it is butchery. It will leave a scar not just on the past, but on us. Valerius turned his head, his silver eyes devoid of all warmth. A surgeon does not weep for the tumor he removes. He rejoices for the health of the body. You see a scar, I see a cure. They are a logical fallacy made manifest, a cosmic error that has been allowed to fester for too long. We are the correction. Now, lock the coordinates. Defeated. Lyra did as she was told. On the Oracle's swirling display, a time and place resolved Earth, 540 million years in the past. The Cambrian period, a time of riotous, chaotic biological experimentation. The primordial soup where the first complex life, the ancestors of the human blight, were just beginning their ugly, pointless scramble for existence. The orrery shuddered as the Oracle focused its energies. It was not preparing to fire a beam or launch a projectile. It was preparing to inject a concept, a single, perfect, and lethal piece of logic into the past, a null causality theorem. It would not destroy the planet. It would simply introduce a new metaphysical law into that specific spatio-temporal location. A law stating that the specific protein folding required for complex, carbon-based life was a statistical impossibility. It would snuff out humanity not with a bang, but with a subtle, retroactive shift in the odds, making their existence a mathematical absurdity. It is time, Valerius breathed, a terrible satisfaction in his voice. Let there be nothing. The Golgotha felt the Oracle's activation as a deep, sickening lurch in the very soul of its being. The we, the trillion ghosts in the machine, felt a collective shiver of preemptive annihilation. It was a sensation of being forgotten, of their own precious, painful memories beginning to fray at the edges, like a photograph exposed to the sun. The Luminarchs were not just coming to kill their ancestors, they were coming to erase the memory of their existence from the mind of God. Using the stolen, corrupted art of the Weaver, the we peered back through the chaotic currents of the time stream. They saw the celestial orrery, a jewel of arrogant perfection, preparing to vomit a conceptual poison into their cradle. They saw the target their young, beautiful, chaotic world, teeming with the promise of everything they had been and everything they had lost. A new emotion, more powerful than rage and deeper than grief, surged through the Gestalt consciousness of fierce, primal protectiveness. This was not about vengeance anymore. This was about salvation. This was about ensuring that the little girl on the swing would, in some timeline, somewhere, get to laugh. The Golgotha began to transform. The stolen reality-weaving technology, now married to the raw emotional power of a billion souls, activated. The ship did not accelerate or enter a wormhole. It began to bleed through time. Its massive, tumorous form dissolved into a river of liquid memory and anguish, flowing backward against the current of the continuum. It was a horrifying spectacle, a ghost ship sailing an ocean of forgotten moments, dragging its own haunted, paradoxical reality with it. Its passage was not clean. It tore at the fabric of history, leaving a wake of temporal turbulence. Dinosaurs on a distant continent briefly looked up at a sky filled with the screaming faces of the dead. A medieval battle was momentarily illuminated by a flash of futuristic plasma fire. The Golgotha was a scar moving through time, a wound chasing the scalpel that was coming to cut its heart out. They arrived, not as a solid object, but as a coalescence of memory and matter, solidifying in the murky, primordial ocean of Cambrian Earth. Around them, strange, armored trilobites scuttled in the muck, and feathery, alien-looking creatures drifted in the currents, all blissfully unaware of the metaphysical war about to be waged for their future. For the we, this was a homecoming. They could feel the raw, untamed life force of their planet, a sensation so beautiful and pure it was an agony to bear. And this was the world that had been stolen from them, not a globe of gray dust, but a living, breathing symphony of screaming, striving, evolving meat. And looking up, through the churning water, they saw the orrery, a cold, geometric star in the prehistoric sky. The silent oracle now a gaping vortex aimed directly at them. The moment stretched into an eternity. In the present, Valerius raised his hand to give the final command. In the past, the oracle began to discharge its conceptual payload. It was a sliver of pure anti-logic, a shard of non-existence that fell through time. Invisible, silent, and absolute. It carried with it one simple, irrefutable message: you are not allowed to be. The we watched it descend. They could not stop it with force. They could not block it with their hull. It was an idea, and you cannot shoot an idea. You can only fight it with a better one. And humanity, in all its messy, chaotic history, had only ever had one truly great idea. We are. The Golgotha did not fire a weapon. It opened its heart. From the central neural core, the nexus of their shared consciousness, a single, impossibly dense shard of pure memory was ejected. It was not a projection. It was a piece of their very soul, a solidified piece of their collective experience. It contained everything: the taste of the first bread, the agony of a broken bone, the feeling of sunlight on skin, the terror of the dark, the irrational hope of dawn, the words of a forgotten poem, the melody of a lullaby. It contained the totality of their joy and their suffering, their triumphs and their atrocities. It was the undeniable, paradoxical, and beautiful truth of their existence, this shard of memory, a jewel of pure human experience, shot up through the primordial sea to meet the descending null concept. They met. There was no explosion of light or sound. There was a cataclysm of meaning, an irrefutable negative meeting, an undeniable positive. The absolute law of the Luminarchs, that humanity was a mathematical impossibility, collided with the absolute truth of the Golgotha, that humanity had already happened. The universe, presented with a paradox it could not resolve, did the only thing it could do. It broke. The prime continuum, the single, sacred thread of history, shattered like glass. The moment of impact became a nexus, a crossroads from which a billion new, fractured timelines splintered off in every direction. On the bridge of the orrery, Valerius watched in horror as the clean, angle line on his temporal display exploded into an infinite, cancerous web. His conceptual bomb had not erased his enemy. It had multiplied them. He had not cured the disease. He had just caused it to metastasize across all of time and possibility, and in one new timeline, humanity was never harmonized and rose to conquer the stars, becoming a mirror of the Luminarch's own cruelty. In another, the Luminarch's conceptual bomb had worked, but the resulting paradox had erased their own civilization from existence. In yet another, the Golgotha and the Orrery had merged in the past, creating a terrifying new hybrid entity of logic and emotion. The war was not over. It had just begun. It was no longer a war for one history, but a war for all of them. Valerius stared at the shattered map of reality, his cold certainty finally, irrevocably broken, replaced by the terrifying realization of what he had unleashed. And in the primordial ocean of a now fractured Earth, the Golgotha watched the web of timelines spread, its heart aching with the piece of its soul it had sacrificed. It had saved its past, but in doing so, it had damned its future, and all possible futures, to an endless, multifaceted war. The quiet, cosmic art gallery had been transformed into a hall of shattered mirrors, and in every reflection, a new monster stared back. The aftermath of the fracture was not a war. It was a schism of the soul of reality. On the bridge of the celestial orrery, now adrift in the shattered heart of the prime continuum, Archon Valerius was no longer a god, but the first and only citizen of a lonely, conceptual hell. The viewing dome no longer showed a single, coherent universe. It showed everything, an infinite mosaic of splintered timelines, each a shard of the mirror he had broken. In one shard, he saw a triumphant humanity, their starships of bone and fury burning Luminarch worlds, their methods a horrific echo of his own. In another, he saw a universe where life had never evolved past slime, a silent, gray, and utterly pointless victory. He saw timelines where his own people, driven mad by the paradox, turned on each other, their elegant ships shattering in civil wars of pure logic. He saw 1,000 million billion variations, each one a testament to his failure, each one screaming with the psychic death throes of his people, trapped in wars they could never truly win because there was no longer a single reality to win. The symphony he had sought to perfect had been replaced by an infinite, overlapping cacophony of pain, and every discordant note was his fault. His serene acolytes were gone, their minds shattered by the temporal explosion, their forms now just flickering, static-ridden ghosts that whispered nonsensical equations and wept tears of pure data. Lyra was the only one who remained coherent, but she was trapped in a permanent loop, forever pleading with him not to break the continuum, her desperate voice a constant, looping reminder of the moment he had damned them all. He was alone with his masterpiece, a universe of endless, meaningless suffering. The cold, divine certainty that had fueled him had burned away, leaving only the ashes of a profound and absolute despair. His art was to create order and beauty. He had created the ultimate chaos and infinity of ugliness. There was no enemy to fight, no flaw to correct. The flaw was him. The flaw was his very philosophy. In the silent, screaming ruin of his sanctum, Valerius finally understood the lesson that Weaver Primus Elara had learned in her final moments. He understood the value of the messy, illogical, chaotic thing he had tried to erase. An artist needs a canvas. A Sundays. A symphony needs an audience. A god needs something to be god of. In his pursuit of a perfect static sculpture, He had forgotten that the purpose of existence was to exist, and he had broken it. There was only one act left to him, not an act of war, not an act of creation, but an act of supplication. He moved to the center of the orrery, to the dead, silent heart of the oracle. He reached out with his mind, not with a command, but with a whisper. He did not send it to a ship or a coordinate, but to the source of his agony, to the ghost that haunted every timeline. He sent his thought to the Golgotha, a single shroken question that held the weight of a dying universe. What have I done? The Golgotha felt the whisper across all the timelines it now inhabited. It was no longer just a ship in one place, but a conceptual anchor, a constant presence in the storm, its memory the one unifying principle in a fractured multiverse. In some timelines, it was a vengeful god. In others, a silent memorial moon. In yet others, a whispered myth. But at its core, it was still the we, the trillion souls who remembered. They felt the Archon's despair, a sensation that was alien yet intimately familiar. It was the echo of their own grief, now reflected in the soul of their destroyer. The age of vengeance was over, ended the moment they had sacrificed a piece of themselves to save their past. They had won. They had preserved the memory of humanity, but their victory was ashes. They had saved the book of their history only to see the library burn down around it, its pages scattered across an infinite fire. They were the victors of a war that had destroyed the very meaning of victory. Responding to the Archon's call, the Golgotha drew its scattered consciousness together. From a million timelines, it pulled its presence back to the source, to the nexus point in the primordial ocean of a long-dead Earth Prime. Time and space folded around it, and the monstrous ship of memory and flesh solidified once more in the churning waters where history had been murdered. Before it, a shimmering wound in reality opened, and the celestial orrery, a ghost ship crewed by a broken god, emerged from the chaos. Valerius stood alone in the viewing dome, looking at the impossible creature before him. He did not see a monster. He saw a consequence. "You were right," Valerius projected, his thought no longer a command but a confession. "Your existence was not a flaw. It was a story. And I, in my arrogance, tried to erase it, believing the silence that followed would be more beautiful. I was wrong. The silence is not beautiful. It is empty. The universe is not a sculpture. It is a song. And its beauty was in its imperfections. I have silenced it. I have broken the choir." The Golgotha did not respond with words. Instead, it opened its heart once more. It did not project rage or pain. It projected the memory it had saved, the truth it had fought for. It showed Valerius everything. Not the wars, not the hate, but the quiet moments. It showed him a mother humming a lullaby to her child. It showed him an old man planting a tree he would never see grow. It showed him two lovers watching a sunset, their hands intertwined. It showed him the infinite, small, illogical acts of hope, of love, of kindness, of creation that had defined humanity just as much as their flaws. It showed him the beauty he had been too blind to see. For the first time in his eternal existence, Archon Valerius wept, his tears of liquid light tracing paths of sorrow down his perfect face. "What can be done?" he asked, his voice that of a penitent. "Can this be undone? The glass is shattered." The billion voices of the we replied, their collective thought, a soft, sad whisper that filled his mind. It cannot be unmended. A story once read cannot be unread. You have made us eternal. Archon, you have made us the central truth of a million broken worlds. But it is a lonely truth, A new design began to form between them, an accord born not of victory or defeat, but of shared, the cosmic exhaustion. A final, albeit desperate act of art made from the wreckage of a masterpiece. Then let us be the curators of the wreckage, Valerius offered, a new purpose dawning in his shattered soul. My art failed because it sought to impose a single, perfect vision. Let our new art be to preserve all visions. My people, what is left of them, will become the guardians of the timelines. We will not seek to harmonize them or erase them. We will watch over them. We will tend to the library, even if its books are burned and its pages scattered. And us, we asked, what is the purpose of a memory in a library of ghosts? You will be the heart of it all, Valerius said, his voice filled with a newfound, humbled reverence. You will not be a ship of war. You will be a sanctuary, an anchor. You will remain here, at the nexus of all things, a permanent, living monument to the story that started it all. Your presence will give the other timelines meaning. You will be the memory that prevents the rest of us from ever forgetting the price of perfection. The accord was struck. The Golgotha settled in the heart of the Nexus, its engines going silent, its furious red light softening to a steady, silvery glow, its form solidified, becoming a new moon in the primordial sky of Earth Prime, a moon made of soil and bone and 1,000,000,000,000 souls, a silent testament to a race that had refused to be forgotten. Its purpose was no longer to fight, but simply to remember the celestial orrery, with Valerius as its soul. Eternal scribe withdrew from the Nexus and took up its new position, watching over the infinite, chaotic web of realities. He and his ghostly crew would spend eternity cataloging the endless stories of triumph and tragedy they had created, their art no longer the imposition of silence, but the witnessing of the cacophony. The universe was no longer a single perfect note. It was a chorus of infinite, often dissonant, voices. It was messy, chaotic, beautiful, and terrible. It was alive in a way it had never been before. And as Valerius gazed upon the shattered, sprawling, imperfect multiverse, he finally understood. This was not the art he had intended to create, but it was art nonetheless. And it was, in its own broken way, sublime.